Thank you. I'm just going to try and correct a situation which we've got ourselves into in the absence of government support partners who would normally take this call. The call would normally fall to the Labour Party. I think in an excess of politeness between Ms Salisa and Ms Delahunty, we have ended up with a situation where one might have had Jenny Salisa having had a call. She sat down politely to let Ms Delahunty take the normal slot. So I'm going to seek leave of the House for Jenny Salisa to take a call at this point. Is there any objection? There appears to be no objection. Jenny Salisa.
Mr Speaker. Thank you, Mr Speaker. The Gambling Amendment Bill number 3 is one that is crucial to me, Mr Speaker. This bill is important to me personally because even though a large proportion of our people, Pacific people, do not gamble, unfortunately the ones who do are at a really high risk of becoming problem gamblers. I'd like to acknowledge the Speaker just before me from the other side of the House, Joan Hayes, as well as Honourable Ruth Dyson for their speeches. I agreed with both of their speeches. Mr Speaker, greater harm minimisation measures should have been included in this bill to mitigate the addictive design that gambling machines have. Pacific people, Mr Speaker, are 4 times more likely than others to become problem gamblers. This is when you compare Pacific with the general population. Pacific people make up 6.5% of our population. However, they make up 21.1% of problem gamblers in this country. Studies have shown that Pacific gamblers are also spending large amounts of money when compared to Māori, when compared to Asian, and when compared to Europeans. The annual average that Pacific people spend gambling, Mr Speaker, is around $13,648 a year. However, the average spending of a European, by comparison, is about $1,761. There's a huge difference between these two figures, Mr Speaker. Last year, the New Zealand Herald on August 14th in 2004 reported that the funds that people put into poker machines, Mr Speaker, are by far being spent by those who live in the poorer parts of Auckland. However, those funds from gaming grants, they don't usually go back to those poorer parts of Auckland. What the data shows is that it's the wealthiest parts of Auckland, it is the most affluent parts of Auckland who do not gamble as much, Mr Speaker. They are the ones who take the majority of the grants from these gaming machines. So the saying that goes, Mr Speaker, the poor gets poorer and the rich get richer, unfortunately, this also happens with the distribution of gaming funds back to the community. Mr Speaker, the research that was covered by the Herald last year was conducted by Auckland Council. The Council challenged the government to consider a fairer way of distribution of these grants back to the community. And I actually agreed with the Council. It would be really, really great to have a system that would actually make sure that those who are most deprived, the poorest parts of Auckland, actually including the electorate I represent, Manukau East, have better access to these funding. And this would actually happen when the system is a fair one. My sincere hope, Mr Speaker, is that this gambling bill, Gambling Bill Amendment number 3, actually addresses this issue. Mr Speaker, the research that the Council conducted also unfortunately showed that those who actually gamble the most unfortunately live in my electorate in Manukau East. The comparison that that the study showed is that those who live in Otara Papatoetoe, they spend about $274 per person per year into these poker machines, and this compared to, say, someone who lives in Orake who spends about $49 per person per year going into the poker machines. And so when you look at the distribution of these funds, Mr Speaker, what this study showed is that those who live in Orake, they get a return from these gaming machines in terms of grants at a rate of about 152%. And those who live in Albert Eden, yet another wealthy place in Auckland, they get a return of 176% from these gaming machines. And yet places like Otahuhu and I'm the MP for Otahuhu, they only get 22% by way of grant from these gaming machines. And Mr. Speaker, this is absolutely not a fair way of distributing these funds. The funds are supposed to go back to the community, but Mr. Speaker, I would actually strongly argue, yes, they should go back to the community, but how about getting these funds back to the community that they actually come out from, which is the most deprived places in Auckland, including Manukau East, Otara, Papatoetoe and Otahuhu. Thank you so much, Mr. Speaker.